I am done, I think, probably with this project. Um, I think probably my intentions were in the right place. I think that I can say that. Um, I've been thinking a lot about this project I've been doing and talking with a lot of people, and I'm starting to think that maybe this isn't a very healthy or productive way of dealing with, some pretty complex feelings of guilt I feel for the opportunities I've had compared to the opportunities that others in the world have not had. But, there's a lot of ways that we can deal with guilt, and, I think maybe this kind of self-flagellation, like some kind of ascetic monk in a hair shirt, is maybe not the way to do it, and maybe trying to shoulder the burdens of the whole world on one's shoulders is not a healthy thing to do. So I think, I just want to say thanks to the people that came on this adventure with me, and I also want to say psych. I'm just kidding. All of that's a lot of rubbish. No, I think what I'm doing and what I am doing is giving 50% of my income this year, my first year working as a doctor in Victoria in Australia. I think what I'm doing is probably the right thing to do, and I think there's not much of a way around that that I can see, but if you can see a way, please let me know. I think it's probably the right thing to do. My name's Henry. I've been doing this for 3 months now, and still loving it. I think it's a great thing that I've been doing it, and I'm going to continue doing it and go full steam ahead. This is a website that I've made for it, and I'd encourage you to visit. I'd encourage you to appreciate the parallax of the clouds and the mountains that I have in the background there. That's prime, pure Henry original JavaScript there. It's very difficult to decide how to make the world better with money. And look, the world's a bit of a messed up place, and that's kind of why I'm doing this. And it's getting better. That should be said. It's getting better compared to how it used to be. 200 years ago, 25% of children died before the age of 1, and that's not very good. And for almost every disease there was no treatment, and natural disasters, forget about it. No protection whatsoever. And that's not to mention any of the luxuries we have today: chocolate biscuits or computers that can do billions of calculations a second and give us access to all of humanity's information, collective knowledge in the swipe of a finger. So the world's getting better, but it's also still not still, but it's now probably a more unequal place than it's ever been before in history. And what that means is that if you're at the better end of that inequality, and I kind of feel like I am, because I've been very lucky in where I've been born and to whom I have been born, I think if you're at the better end of that inequality, it means you have this enormous power and opportunity to make the world a better place for a lot of people. And I think maybe with that great power comes great responsibility to maybe do just that, and that's what I'm trying to do. And it's hard to decide who to give money to, because there's lots of charities out there, and not all of them are good, and some of them actually do actively bad work, and I think it puts a lot of people off. But I'm trying to figure out who to give money to, and this is my pyramid scheme here, which is the way I'm donating. It's a display of all of the charities that I've given to so far, and it represents my strategy, which is I'm giving money to really great charities, and I'm deciding what charities are great based on expert advice and grassroots knowledge from the people living the world's problems, but also from trials out in the field of what actually works. And then finally, I'm also relying on crowdsourced knowledge, information from friends and family and whoever else wants to let me know what they think. And so I'm giving money to great charities, and then I'm giving even more money to really, really great charities that are doing just fantastic work at making the world a better place. And I'm coming at you live, by the way, from the lands of the Yorta Yorta people. And it always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and I don't think there's much of a way around that either. So let's talk about this fortnight. Well, actually, last fortnight I've been a bit slack. This fortnight, a couple of fortnights ago, I made $5,000, which is not a brag. It's maybe sends a message that, you know, doctors make probably more money than maybe they need to. And I think if anyone tells you that there's too many doctors in the world, too many medical students graduating to doctors, that person's probably a doctor trying to protect their own wage, because as long as there's not enough doctors, we're going to exploit the system and make this kind of just ridiculous amounts of cash. But it's okay because I'm giving half of it to charity, right? I'm giving to 3 different charities this fortnight. I'm giving to the Against Malaria Foundation first, which I'll talk about. I'm also giving to the Humane League and the Black Duck Foods. 3 really good charities. So let's start talking about the Against Malaria Foundation. So this is, I've actually given to this one before. This is an old favourite we're revisiting. The Against Malaria Foundation is one of these preventative health charities that work internationally. It's recommended by GiveWell. GiveWell is a charity evaluator that is sort of the centerpiece of the effective altruism movement, which is all about trying to think about how to give in the most effective way possible to make the most change, most kind of change in the world for a given cost. And one of the charities that they select as their top charities across all the world is the Against Malaria Foundation. And what the Against Malaria Foundation is this organisation started by one guy in the UK about 15 years ago, and it's now run by 9 people. They're a small organisation, but so far they've managed $300 million in donations, and they spend almost all of that money on their one program that they do, which is distributing mosquito nets to mainly sub-Saharan African countries where malaria is a huge problem. Malaria is a terrible disease. It kills about 400,000 people a year and has killed enormous numbers of people since the beginning of either humanity or mosquitoes, whichever came second. It mainly kills children as well, because when you've had malaria a few times, you actually become slightly immune, so you're less likely to have a severe case of it. So what the organisation does is they distribute mosquito nets, which prevent mosquitoes. You kind of sleep in a net, and it prevents mosquitoes from being able to bite you while you sleep. And in order to get infected with malaria, a mosquito that's infected with the parasite needs to sting you. So it's a pretty basic idea, and all they do is they channel this money into purchasing enormous numbers of these nets, which go for about $10 each, but ultimately $5 each, because what they do is they partner with governments, the governments of these countries where they're distributing the nets, and the governments tend to pay like half the cost. So it's a super basic idea, but I guess the key is, does it work? And GiveWell releases all these reports for all of their charities, and one primary question is always, does it work? And so in order for these things to work, I guess the biggest thing you would think is, well, if you're distributing all these malaria nets, are people actually using them? And the evidence from the Against Malaria Foundation and from GiveWell, based on surveys that people do after they do these distribution programs, is that people do actually use these nets quite a lot. The number's somewhere between like 50 and 80% of people who are given a net use it, which is, pretty good. I guess, at the lower end of that, you're thinking, well, for every net I give out, another's not being used. But to me, it seems like a pretty good uptake. And I think in terms of the effectiveness you're getting out of it, preventing people from getting malaria, which can cause death, as well as other really awful conditions like anemia, which can itself cause kind of developmental delays in children. It can also cause issues in pregnancy. The potential for having massive impacts with really pretty cheap interventions is massive. So look, I think the Against Malaria Foundation is great, and a lot of people around the world think it's great as well. So another criticism sometimes is that, well, the Against Malaria Foundation might be overfunded because so many people give to it. They had $100 million given to them last year. But GiveWell looks at that as well. They are very astute in trying to figure out which charities have room to expand, and certainly the Against Malaria Foundation is in their consideration, and I'm relying on their expert advice here, I suppose. In their consideration has a huge potential to expand to scale up its projects massively. So that's the Against Malaria Foundation. I'm giving them $2,100 this session. I want to talk about the Humane League next, to whom I've given $233.20. That odd number is because of exchange rates, because it's a US-based charity. There was some chat over the last fortnight that perhaps animal welfare was a topic that I might consider integrating into the pyramid scheme. Animal welfare is very important to me personally. I think the way that we treat animals in a lot of our world is not very nice. Particularly factory farming makes me quite uncomfortable in a lot of ways. The way we kind of jam pigs together in little pens, or the way we transport cows kind of crammed together in double-decker trucks and driving through the heat and dust, shitting on all each other, and the way we keep chickens in tiny little cages to get their eggs. And even when we don't keep them in cages, there's sometimes 10,000 chickens to a hectare. That still counts as free range, and that's not a lot of room, really. The way we mules sheep is pretty messed up as well, kind of cutting their skin off, sometimes without anaesthetic. So look, I think there's a lot that's not great about the way we treat animals, but there's also a tension anytime you're talking about animal welfare. And the tension is, and maybe we're not ready to talk about this, by the way. Don't know if we're ready for this conversation, but nature is horribly cruel, and anyone that's watched Animal Planet is well aware that, when you watch a lion take down an antelope, that is absolutely what nature is, and it's not nice. And that kind of thing is happening throughout the entire Amazon, all savannas in the world. It's a rough place. We can try and eliminate as much as we can humans, unnecessary cruelty to animals, but the idea that we could ever have a world where animal cruelty doesn't exist it's kind of not possible, because in a lot of ways that's what the last 3 billion years of natural selection and dog-eat-dog evolution has been, unfortunately. Anyway, animal welfare is fantastic. I'm a vegetarian myself. I'm basically a vegan, actually. I don't eat any eggs. I don't eat eggs ever since I found out what they do with the male chicks. They do put them in an industrial shredder. It's like cartoon villain stuff I don't really want any part in. And I also don't eat a whole lot of dairy because I'm not entirely convinced about the way we treat dairy cattle either. So look, this is Animal Charity Evaluators. This is the GiveWell of animal charities, animal welfare charities. It's a big part of the effective altruism movement as well. They have 4 top charities that they recommend, and one of them that really stuck out to me was the Humane League. The Humane League is an international organisation, about 15 years old. It mainly works in kind of political campaigning, corporate campaigning, lobbying, which is kind of a bit dry, but potentially has massive effects, and they certainly seem to have pretty good effects. They primarily focus on trying to eliminate cage eggs, which is where you keep chickens in tiny little cages their whole life in areas where they are so tight that they can't ever spread their wings, which is where the name of their sub-organisation, the Open Wing Alliance, gets its name. And this seems to be a big part of the Humane League's work, the Open Wing Alliance. And underneath the Open Wing Alliance umbrella are a whole lot of different animal rights organisations throughout the world. A lot of the Humane League's funding seems to go into grants for these organisations, specifically targeted at trying to campaign fight against cage eggs. And cage eggs is a strange aspect to our world. This is the website for the Humane League. Cage eggs are weird. You meet people in the world who will just be in absolute love with their pet dog or cat or budgie, and yet they'll go out and they'll buy cage eggs. And I think, part of the reason is that we're very disconnected from the production of our food, and it's very easy to not know what's going on behind the scenes. But I think we should know, and I don't think it's good. And I think if more people knew, we'd be a little bit off-put by it, I would hope. In their annual report, this is the Humane League, in their annual report, they do spend about 14% of their money on fundraising, and I'm not a fan of fundraising. It's a necessary evil, I think, at the moment, because if we just all gave before we were asked, rather than waiting for someone to throw a banquet or a charity whatever event, then I think the world would be a much better place. Companies wouldn't have to spend as much on fundraising, and good organisations would just get the funding they need without having to throw a bunch of money into marketing. What a nice world that would be. But anyway, 14%, it seems like quite a lot, makes me a little bit uncomfortable. I think they're a really cool organisation now, and I think animal welfare is a really valuable cause, so I've given them $233.2 Australian dollars, which is about 170 US dollars. And the last organisation I want to talk about is Black Duck Foods, and this is a really cool one. I've given them $200 this session. Black Duck Foods is an organisation started by Bruce Pascoe, and Bruce Pascoe is this Indigenous identifying man he wrote a book called Dark Emu. And Dark Emu is a really interesting book. It argues very convincingly that Indigenous Australians actually had a really complex and well-developed agricultural system, more complex and developed than they've ever really been given proper credit for. And what he's done, this book's become really popular, Dark Emu, and I think what Bruce Pascoe's done is he's kind of taken a lot of the money that he's made from Dark Emu, and he's using it to develop this property out near Malakuta in East Victoria. And he's kind of turned it into this research farm where he's experimenting with all these ideas about Indigenous agriculture, specifically targeting growing of native grains, native grasses, like the dancing grass, and trying to cultivate it on a commercial level, which, Indigenous people kind of used to do. There's stories about Indigenous people growing these grains in kind of massive quantities and then storing them in these granaries that explorers would kind of raid and use as supplies to keep themselves alive. I just think it's such a cool idea in a lot of ways. It's expanding on the really interesting ideas in his book. It's just like raising awareness about all these really interesting ideas, ancient ideas from Indigenous culture. It's kind of collaborating, it's getting them all together, it's adding further research, maybe expanding on these ideas as well. I think it's really exciting. I think it has potential kind of environmental interests as well. There's, potentially certain advantages to growing grasses that are native to Australia rather than trying to grow a whole bunch of wheat, which was cultivated initially in Mesopotamia, which is quite a different environment. Maybe if we grew more native grains, and they'll probably never be as productive as a crop of corn, which has been artificially selected over thousands of years to be as calorie dense as possible. But there's a potential that maybe if we grew more native things that were more suited to our environment, maybe we wouldn't have to drain the entire Murray-Darling Basin to irrigate all the farms. I don't know. It's an interesting idea to explore. And then it's also really cool, the idea that maybe Bruce Pascoe is kind of generating entire new industries, like kind of setting off whole new opportunities for primarily Indigenous people to, make use of this knowledge and culture that's been there the whole time, and kind of providing empowerment through that. I think it's a really cool idea. And he's also, talks on this website about ideas of food sovereignty, which is giving people control over the production of their own food. And there's a lot of movements about that around the world today. So I think Black Duck Foods is a really cool organisation. I'm going to be watching very closely what this group does and what the results of their research are. And when I get to eat some delicious dancing grass bread. So I've given them $200. And that's it. Let me know what you think. Let me know who's good, who's bad, what I should be doing, what I shouldn't be doing. I really appreciate any and all feedback, and I do listen, and you know what? It advises me on how to operate. So I would really encourage anyone to send me a comment, send me what you think. I appreciate it all. Much love. Peace out. I'll talk to you soon.